Hello, everyone. This is Corsair Mac, one of your four wellness professionals, and I am here to do another Wellness Wednesday video for you. This was supposed to come out in February during Black History Month, so I do apologize, but due to technical difficulties, I had to re-record it a few times, so hopefully this time everything does turn out well so that way I can get you the most quality video that I can produce. So for this Wellness Wednesday, we're going to do a follow-up video to one of the earlier videos I did for Black History Month in regards to mental health in the Black community, how to overcome 4 centuries of stress, trauma, and drama, and more focus on stereotypes of Black Americans throughout the years. So this video originally was around 20 minutes long, so I'm probably going to split it up into 2 to 3 videos to help with length, as well as that way we can encompass everything there is to know about stereotypes of Black Americans. So what we will do for this first video, we're going to go into the history of stereotypes of Black Americans starting back in the 1700s, some of the stereotypes that are used, as well as negative mental health implications because of that. And I want you guys to really look at similarities between stereotypes of how people viewed Black Americans then up to how people view Black Americans now. So sit back, relax, and let's talk about stereotypes of Black Americans throughout the centuries. All right, so first let's talk about the history of negative stereotypes. So, arguably, this started back around the early 1700s with a man named William Lynch. So, in his famous speech, as well as his famous letter, he talked about ways to control the angry runaway slave. So, first was to pit them against each other, young versus old, man versus woman, lighter skin versus darker skin, plantation versus plantation, etc. So that way they are more reliant on their slave owners instead of other slaves that they can potentially team up with. Second was to limit their knowledge. So teach them limited English so that way they won't know what the slave owners were talking about, planning, so on and so forth. So that way they could keep them dumb and under control. Third was to destroy their sense of community. So that way they destroy their trust in one another. So that way they will put more trust in their slave owner. And lastly was to destroy the male image, right? So ultimately that way the males would be used to basically breed and then be stripped away and then at times broken in front of other slaves as well as the females, which would instill a lot of fear in the females to not rely on the male slaves, but to rely more on the slave owners and the slave masters, right? And I won't get into all the gruesome details that go along with breaking the slaves and what they did, but ultimately, even after slavery, that left an image of Black Americans. So ultimately, that bred stereotypes like the mammy slave, the Jezebel, the mulatta, also the mandingo, the sambo, the brute, the Uncle Tom, right, and so on and so forth. So now that we learned where these stereotypes came from, now let's go over a couple of them so that way we can really understand how those similar characteristics from back then can be seen up into right now. So we're going to just go over 2 or 3 of them and really look to see how that plays into the image of Black Americans now, as well as the negative mental health implications of those. All right, so first let's talk about the mammy as well as the sapphire. And from those stem what we know today as the strong, independent, angry Black woman. So ultimately, the mammy's job was to essentially breed kids from other slaves as well as take care of the slave owner's kids, right? And ultimately, the mammy would be angry at the male slave for being lazy. She would be angry and try to get him to do things to help make their lives better. But then also, she was a confidant in the slave owners as well, giving advice, taking care of their kids, and raising their kids to become better members of society. And the sapphire basically was the female slave that can do everything a male slave could. So the mammy was overweight and unattractive. The sapphire was basically muscular and unattractive also. And basically, she was angry at the male slaves because she had to pick up and do work that they had to do also, and also basically being treated like a pack mule and being angry at the male slaves for doing that, not being able to pull their weight. So again, from those stem what we know today as the angry, independent Black woman. Because ultimately back then, she had to be independent from the black male because ultimately that was a way of control from the slave owners because she couldn't rely on the black male. She had to rely on the slave owners to ultimately have a quote unquote comfortable life and ultimately to not get in trouble, beaten, so on and so forth. And also, they were taught to raise their daughters to be independent from the men, as well as they were taught to raise their sons to be dumb and strong. So ultimately, they wouldn't receive any backlash from the slave owners and ultimately to help them stay alive. And we see this now as, again, we criticize black women for being loud, for being angry, and for being independent. And we set those things as bad. And then ultimately, what happened there is, of course, throughout the years through media and things like that, this stereotype has been reinforced over and over and over again to the point where we see that in today's society. And the negative mental health implications of that are, of course, a lot of trauma, a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety and paranoia, a lot of anger, of course, a lot of fear. Even there's guilt in that. And that's a lot of things for the African American female to bear, especially in today's society. Now, let's get into the men with the Sambo Mandingo stereotype. So, the Sambo stereotype for Black American men was essentially they were lazy and carefree. They lacked a sense of direction. They didn't know what to do or how to do anything. So, they really heavily relied on their slave owners for guidance. And essentially, they were happy for that guidance. The Mandingo was essentially the over sexualized black man who essentially was there to take advantage of their women as well as other female slaves. You know, when I say women, I mean white American women, as well as other female slaves. So that showed that they were not human, they were more animals than anything, there to ruin their society. And fast forward to that today, we see that in today's stereotypes as well as in today's media of men being dumb, lazy. Basically, they don't know what they're doing. They're there for essentially one purpose, for purely entertainment, right? Because that more involves physical labor than anything else. Stuff like being a doctor, lawyer, surgeon, physician, so on and so forth. And then also we see a lot of the stereotype where especially young black men are over sexualized. They're there essentially to have sex with anything and everything that moves in regards to women and essentially abandon them, right? And then again, that plays a lot of negative mental health implications in regards to self-esteem and self-worth. And this goes with the women also, because then that plays again into where the men would just have sex with the women and then boom, abandon them to raise their children by themselves. So we see that happening back then, and we could put that up until now and seen the same thing happening, but ultimately not realizing where that came from and so on and so forth. But that is probably a video for another time. But ultimately, again, negative self-esteem and self-worth, depression, of course, anxiety, a lot of fear and paranoia as well. And ultimately, there's a lot of mistrust, right? A lot of mistrust that can cause a lot more negative mental health symptoms, as well as trauma and PTSD in there as well. So now that we went over a couple of those, right now let's get into how we can overcome these things to help us live the best lives that we can, as well as overcome these negative stereotypes. All right, so here are some action steps to help overcome these negative mental health implications. So first things first, normalize learning your past. And I can't stress that enough because ultimately a lot of these things come from ignorance, right? We believe this is the norm. But ultimately, when we learn the past, we realize that no, this isn't the norm. This is a chain of events that happened all the way back then that is being continued up until now. And that's the first way to help break that image and help break that stereotype that we've bought into. Second is essentially normalize talking to professionals. So it doesn't have to be a mental health professional, it could be a professional in any setting. Because these professionals help clarify as well as help your brain separate the stereotype from other people that look like you, right? So ultimately, if you believe that you're stupid, you're ignorant, so on and so forth, then talk to a professional in higher education, or talk to a lawyer, or talk to a doctor, or talk to a teacher, so on and so forth, that help quote unquote break the stereotype, right? Because ultimately that'll help your brain see, hey, this person looks like me and they broke this stereotype that I believed for so long. So if they can do it, I can do it, right? And that helps you promote your own self-esteem and self-confidence, right? That helps increase your own self-worth to show that, hey, I don't have to follow this self-fulfilling prophecy that's been laid out before me, but ultimately I can do what I want to do and be successful at it. Right. And the last one I'll say is get to know people different from you, right? People of different races, different genders, even of the same race, but in different regions, right? To help break down your own biases as well as your own stereotypes about other people, because that'll also help your brain see, okay, I had this belief about this certain group of people for so long. Now that I've got to know them, I see that this stereotype is wrong. So that'll help me see, okay, maybe other stereotypes I had, not only in other people, but stereotypes that I believed about myself, are wrong as well. And that will help your brain overcome that aspect to help see that, okay, I got to get to know people on an individual basis instead of just believing a collective thought about them. And ultimately, with those three things, of course, not the end all be all things, of course, but those three things are a great way to start with helping break down and dismantle those stereotypes. All right, if you made it to this part of the video, then you've made it to the end. I want to thank you for listening to this video, and hopefully this will have helped change your minds about certain stereotypes that you believe about Black Americans, but hopefully also other Americans as well as other minority groups. So if you do want to talk more about this with a wellness professional, if you are an ECC student, then please feel free to either give us a call at 847-214-7390 extension 1. Email us at studentwellness@elton.edu. Or if you're interested in making an appointment also, you can also go through AccessECC to schedule an online appointment. So I want to thank you guys very much. Remember, stay strong out there. We are going through a difficult time, but we are in this together. And if we help out each other, we will be able to make it through. So thank you guys very much. This is Courser Mac, one of your wellness professionals, signing out.